In this video, we're going to check out viewer comments regarding little people in Europe, and this is going to be both locals talking about their regional folklore, talking about elves, fairies, dwarves, whatever the regional appellation for these little people are, and first-hand encounters with little people in Europe. So we're going to start in the British Isles. So the first comment's DNR 2089, 5 years ago. In the Isle of Man, we have stories of little people. They're usually called fairies or themselves, but they aren't the kind of Disney fairy with wings and sparkle. These guys can be malignant or helpful, depending if you've offended them or not. They look somewhat human, but small. However, there is also the Glashtin, who are tall and blonde and silent. Next one's Melly Mom 1121, 3 years ago. When my grandmother came from Ireland, it is said she brought a puka and a leprechaun with her. The leprechaun loved her and couldn't bear to be removed from her. The puka was just curious as to why she would leave home. Story goes that on her deathbed, she was talking to them and told them to go home. Next comment's Mock Humor 3 years ago. In Ireland, you can't cut down a fairy tree because of the bad luck that will follow. There's a motorway that had to be built around a fairy tree so as to not disturb it. Next one's BG 9318, 3 years ago. Strong fairy stories here in Ireland. The old people that are gone talked about them more, but there was rings of rocks or rings of trees all over the country, and a lot of people don't touch them like farmers or builders. Now, rings of rocks and rings of trees, I am not an expert on this. I honestly shouldn't even talk about this, but that gives me the impression that it was something the Druids were involved in. Druids being kind of the priests and priestesses of the old Celtic religion in Ireland. I understand rings of trees and rings of rocks were considered kind of like, I guess, their equivalent of churches, where they would do rituals, sacrifices, things like that. Like I said, I shouldn't even talk about this. I don't know enough about it. Next comment's Todd Douglas Fox 3 years ago. I've had one encounter completely unexpected by me. It was in Ireland. Another Irish story. I would love to have had more, but in nearly 70 years there has only been the one. The little person hid as soon as he knew I was looking. I called after, basically saying, "I already know you're here." Momentarily, he looked around a tree for a second and was gone again. I shouted after him, "Thank you." There was no doubt that I had the honor just the once. So the first sighting of a little person in Ireland. Next comment's Corvus Scott Williams, 4751, 2 years ago. All the best from Land's End, Cornwall, England. There's plenty of the gentry around here still. So he calls them the gentry. Reminds me of it in Newfoundland fairy lore, they have to call them the good people. Not because they like them, but because to call them anything else would be offending them, and they don't want to offend them because of what they can do to them. So in Cornwall, they call them the gentry. I wonder if it's the same principle. Next comment's Little Kitty 22, 2 years ago. Here in England, folks do believe in fairies, even though this belief is more of an Irish thing. I wonder if there is something to it. I twice lost a ring in my backyard. Never found these rings again. I spent years searching for them, and instructed gardeners to look for them. Nothing. I tried to reconstruct how I had lost the rings by throwing keys in a similar way. Found the rings immediately, each time. The rings I lost were real gold with precious stones. I bet the fairies took them. Fairies are said to be evil. Not sure if that's true. I'm not a Brit. I'm half Native American and half Egyptian, so not too familiar with the concept of fairies. I would love to know the story of how your parents met. That's an interesting combination. But the idea that fairies will take things is almost like a universal one in the different European folk traditions that I've studied. They're supposed to take things, and a lot of times it's little things that don't matter to people, like, they might matter, but they're not super valuable, like a pair of mittens or something, or in one of the stories it was clothespins. Just little random things that kind of make your life a little bit annoying. I mean, who's to say they don't take precious jewelry as well? Next comment's User Adoyle 123, 1 year ago. Here in Ireland, we have tales of the little people. The Hill of Tara is one of the most famous, as it's home to the fairies. Google the Hill of Tara. Also, Tir na Nog. Apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Tir na Nog is depicted as an island paradise and supernatural realm of everlasting youth, beauty, health, abundance, and joy. It is alleged to appear every so often off the coast of Galway, Ireland. The Hill of Tara between 4000 and 2500 BC. The people of Tara believe the hill to be an entrance to the other world, the site where gods entered our world. So important was this otherworldly legacy to the future kingship that the High Kings of Tara, on their inauguration, had to symbolically marry the goddess Mebd in order to become king. Google for the rest of the tale. You can go visit the Hill of Tara. Well, let's go Google it. So Wikipedia says, the Hill of Tara is a hill and ancient ceremonial and burial site near Skirn in County Meath, Ireland. Look at this place. Tradition identifies the hill as the inauguration place and seat of the High Kings of Ireland. It also appears in Irish mythology. Tara consists of numerous monuments and earthworks, dating from the Neolithic to the Iron Age, including a passage tomb, the Mound of the Hostages. What's a passage tomb? A grave or passage tomb consists of one or more burial chambers covered in earth or stone and having a narrow access passage made of large stones. I think these are also called barrows, if I'm not mistaken. Burial mounds, road enclosures, a standing stone believed to be the Lia Fail, or Stone of Destiny, and a ceremonial avenue. There's also a church and graveyard on the hill. Tara forms part of a larger ancient landscape, and Tara itself is a protected national monument under the care of the Office of Public Works, an agency of the Irish government. Very cool, never heard of this before. Okay, next comments Don Rollins, 2408, 1 year ago. I really enjoy your content. The depth of research and the history you include is so interesting and informative. We've got many tales of fae folk or little people here in Wales. The story of a local ruined castle, Castle Dinas Bran, involves a local saint and the fae. I find folklore and legends so fascinating. Have a lovely week. Check out this castle, Dinas Bran. Look at this. Castle Dinas Bran is a medieval castle, this is Wikipedia, built by the princes of Powys Fadog, which occupies a prominent hilltop site above the town of Llangollen in Derbyshire, Wales. I apologize, I'm butchering these names, I'm sure. The presently visible stone castle was probably built in 1260s by Gruffydd Maelor II, a prince of Powys Fadog, on the site of several earlier structures, including an Iron Age hill fort. And then it says here, legends and literature. Whilst the historical record for Dinas Bran is sparse, there are many myths and legends associated with the ancient site. And it talks about a popular Welsh song called My Fanwy. And I'm just kind of skimming it. It looks kind of like a love song. And the other thing is, the castle's first literary appearance is a 13th century romance entitled Falk le Fitzwarren, or The Romance of Falk Fitzwarren, referred to as a ruin during the early years of the Norman conquest. The tale continues to tell of an arrogant Norman knight, Payne Peveril, who hears that no one had the courage enough to stay overnight inside the castle ruins for fear of evil spirits. It tells about a giant that attacks him and his friends. So nothing on Wikipedia about the little people, but it says there are many myths and legends, so I guess little people must be one of those legends. Next one here is David Whalen, 1545, 1 year ago. They do exist. Saw a small person in Kent, England in the early 2000s in some ancient woodland. He wasn't a friendly little fella. Bearded, greenish color, very angry looking, near the foundations of an old Saxon church of St. Nicholas, an ancient, strange area. Now, I just Googled it, and it's given me one possibility as the St. Nicholas Church in Leeds. Is that what it is? It does look like it's kind of near a wooded area, but I wouldn't call this like an ancient woodland. It looks more like a park. That's probably not it. And just looking at it, it says 11th century, so that wouldn't be Saxon, would it? I mean, I guess Anglo-Saxon, but not Saxon as in the Germanic tribe that came to England in the aftermath of the evacuation of the legions. Well, David Whalen, if you know what church this is, if you can elaborate on it, please let me know in the comments. Next comments from Silly Puppy, 5940, 1 month ago. There's been a fairy/leprechaun sighting near Loch Ness. Yes, that Loch Ness. Next comments, RD85010, 11 months ago. I seen a leprechaun, little person, in May 2006 on the Royal Canal, Ireland. What's the Royal Canal? Wikipedia says it's a canal originally built for freight and passenger transportation from Dublin to Longford in Ireland. From the late 1700s, it looks like that's when it was built. And it sure does look like a ferry spot, doesn't it? Next comments from Andrea Dingbat, a great commenter. I always enjoy her comments. 3 months ago, she says, Thank you, Mr. Peters. This reminds me of when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I would find and keep the tiniest flint arrowheads. To me, even then, they seemed so small. And now, if I think about it, they were about the size of my little fingernail, perhaps smaller. I treasured the tiny, amazing, perfect little arrows. Thinking about them, they were far too small for hunting anything, not even rabbits or mice. My mother threw them out, when she threw me out on my 18th birthday. I'm sorry about that. Along with all the fossils, crystals, and mineral specimens I'd collected. I'd have loved to ask a historian or archaeologist who made them and why. Also how, as they must have been napped with utmost care by tiny hands. Thank you very much for reminding me of these. Andrea and Critters. P.S. If anyone wants to know where I found them, it was Lawton Farm, Caravan Park, Reading, Berkshire, United Kingdom, in the hedgerow alongside. I found them at what looked like a Victorian bottle dump, in 1969/1972. Now, I'll say the little arrowheads reminds me so much of, and I'm sure this must have been in response to this. I've talked about this before, but in the Great Sandhills, this is like it looks like the Sahara Desert in Saskatchewan, in southwest Saskatchewan, is this area called the Great Sandhills, and it's just these big piles of sand in the middle of nowhere. And the natives had different stories about them. The Blackfoot thought they were the place where if you died, if Indians died, natives died, their spirits would go there. And they'd say that if you ever camped out there at nighttime, you'd hear, phantom horses riding around. You'd hear people talking. It was just like a place where all the ghosts came out at night, and where when you died, your spirit would go there and live there. And the Cree, the Plains Cree, thought that it was a place where little people lived. They would call them Memegwesoak, some variation of that. I can't remember the Plains Cree one, but it's similar to that. And they were like these little, strong, hairy men that kind of had preternatural abilities, and they would live inside the hills. And they would, when they would go there, they would find little tiny footprints in the sand and little tiny arrowheads, which they attributed to the little people. Anyway, let's find out where Lawton Farm is. Okay, here we are, on the southern end of the Isle of Britain. Now, it's looking to me kind of like what a Canadian trailer park looks like, a little bit. It's a bunch of mobile homes. No, they're not mobile homes, they have bricks. Huh. So I assume it's in this park. Is that right, Andrea? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy these unpolished videos of mine, you might be interested in my new channel, the Gary Mangiacopra Archive. On that channel, I go through the files of the late, great Gary Mangiacopra, one of the most prolific Fortean archivists in the world, who spent his life collecting material on unexplained phenomena. Don't let the thumbnails turn you off. There's no AI in these videos. It's just me going through the archives, reading the most interesting stories. If you'd like to check it out, please click the link in the description. Next comment, Seraphim91, 3 months ago. Interesting, the idea that they go to live with the little people in a beautiful underworld after death. So this comment is referring to, it's an old, I want to say it's some sort of Iroquoian, like maybe Petun or Huron or Wyandot, or maybe it's Iroquois, like Seneca, Mohawk, I'm not sure. But for sure, some Iroquoian story. I did it in a video on little people legends from the Ontario Peninsula. But it's this idea that little people live in these beautiful caves underground. And it's kind of an underworld, but very nice. Anyway, I'll continue here. I'm from Cornwall, the one in the UK, not Ontario, and there are legends here about how people who saw piskies or something saw the recently deceased among them, with the implication being that the deceased might eventually become piskies themselves. A more Christianized version says that they are the souls of unbaptized infants who cannot enter heaven, but who are nevertheless not condemned to hell, and so go about on the earth making mischief, and sometimes helping people with chores. Okay, so an idea that piskies, which I suppose is the Cornish name for little people, I've heard pixies too, that they are kind of like ghosts or people who die and they're not ready for heaven, not ready for hell, instead of being purified in purgatory, which I think is the traditional Christian belief. They become little people. And this kind of evokes, there's a Newfoundlandic story, which I'm sure 100% comes from Ireland or the United Kingdom. And it's the idea that little people are the neutral angels. So there's a Christian tradition that at the beginning of time, Lucifer, the greatest angel, had a rebellion against God. And a third of the angels allied themselves with him and had this war in heaven. And they were defeated and sent into hell. And this legend from the British Isles, I'm sure, says that there was another, so 1/3 of the angels were loyal to God, 1/3 were loyal to Lucifer, and another third were neutral. And as punishment for their neutrality, God banished these angels to earth. And the legend says they'll be the last to enter heaven on Judgment Day. And so they bide their time on earth, sometimes helping people, sometimes causing mischief, and they're very upset with their current lot, I guess, which is why they're so mischievous. Next comment, Star Wars J 6 days ago. Walking my dog a few months ago in the small hours of the suburbs of London, United Kingdom, I literally see this thing for a second or two. As I rounded a corner, a small man, about a foot tall, ran behind a parked car. My dog went mental, and I quickly went around the car to see it more clearly. Yep, he had vanished. I couldn't tell you what he was wearing. I get the feeling he was either naked or in creamy white-colored clothing. I know how crazy that sounds, but I did see him. Interesting, the dog went crazy. Right in the middle of London, United Kingdom, in the suburbs. And now we're going to mainland Europe, which I've lumped into, there's not much here. But first one's from Hunt Baskin 5 years ago. The Carpathian Mountains have similar traditions. Now these are in, Romania, aren't they? Carpathian Mountains? No, they stretch across Central and Eastern Europe. They pass through Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, and Ukraine. Look at this. Ooh, what a cool place. Next comments, Matthew Varner, 6597, 4 years ago. I lived in Germany and had a job as a delivery driver for a local restaurant. I'm fairly certain I delivered food to a couple of families of gnomes or dwarves. One house had its entire front yard packed with hundreds of little gnome figurines. I caught a glimpse of the family. They were all less than 5 feet tall, with big cherry cheeks and wide mouths. Another house I delivered to was an apartment building, and it was a female with the same characteristics. Very short, with big rosy cheeks and a wide mouth. Like the corners of the mouths almost touched their ears. I had a few other events happen to me in Germany that have pretty much convinced me that folkloric creatures live side by side with Homo sapiens in our modern age. I mean, that is weird. A little family with weird mouths that have just a bunch of gnomes in their garden, or in their front yard. It is kind of eerie. Next comment's Pilgrim98 3 years ago. In Italian folklore, precisely in the northeastern region of Emilia-Romagna, there is a kind of fairy or gnome called Mazzapegul. This being is variously described, but it is always a hairy little person with a red hat, exactly like the luton is said to be clad in red. It is said to braid the hairs of horses at night, and even the notion that the horses will be found full of sweat coincides with their Canadian counterparts. The Mazzapegul also shares characteristics with the poltergeist, as it is always drawn and fascinated by young women specifically. Their long hair may be similar to the manes of horses. Interesting idea. It can apparently become invisible, or at the very least hide really well, and can become annoying, mischievous, or even mortally dangerous to males in the household if his love is rejected. To deal with a Mazzapegul, it is necessary to either commit specific magic rituals, or make him be disgusted by the girl he is stalking, which can be accomplished if she is dirty, if she eats while in the bathroom, and in other similar ways. Wow, that is really interesting. Because interesting he draws a connection between this thing and both the luton, like the kind of generic... Luton is a French one. It's a French little person, but the stories are kind of really similar across continental Europe of little people that they hang out in rural areas in barns. They braid the manes and tails of horses, so they at nighttime people will come and find their horses, and their tails and manes have these tiny little braids that they can't undo. And sometimes they'll find them lathered in sweat, and the idea is that the little people will take them out and ride them really hard all night, and then bring them back in the morning. And they have the little red hat, those little pictures of gnomes that have the red hat? That's because it's a super common theme in continental European folklore that the little people wear these little red stocking caps, I guess. But I wanted to say it's interesting that he made a connection between poltergeist and little people, because in some poltergeist stories, which is where it involves a child. It can be a boy, but it's almost always a teenage girl or a prepubescent girl, usually a teenage girl, very often on a farm in a rural area, where weird things will happen in the home. Things will fly across the room by themselves. It's always very violent and noisy. You'll hear sounds playing in the house, musical instruments playing, huge bangs on the wall or on the roof or on the floor. Fires will sometimes start spontaneously somewhere. But another common theme in a lot of poltergeist stories is that the manes and tails of horses or cattle will be braided at nighttime. So this Mazzapegul kind of marries the two things together in the creature's obsession with a teenage girl or young women. That's really interesting. I have to read more about that. Okay, now we're moving on to Scandinavia, and I think this is the most stories are from Scandinavia here. And the first comment's from Tommy Loveless 5 years ago. Interesting. I just shared this with a friend that lives north of Helsinki, Finland. He says, yes, everyone there has heard this. Next comments, Freykitha Ravenous, 516, 3 years ago. Elves are essential figures in Northern European lore, even being something modern Icelanders have woven into their law books. Stories of Hyperborea, Thule, and so on abound. Some even think Scandinavians have partial elf ancestry. Now, they're kind of vague about this, how modern Icelanders have woven fairy lore into, or not fairy lore, be elf lore into their law books. It kind of reminds you what a previous commenter said about special fairy trees that roads had to be built around. So I wonder if that's the same sort of thing in Iceland. Next comments, Hug Ice 5144, 4 years ago. I do come from Islands, and I have to say we have this, even to this day, a Minister of Parliament who represents ferries. The main road that leads from Keflavik Airport, International Airport, to Reykjavik, county's capital, goes straight most of the way, but all of a sudden it bears off to the left, going around what looks like lava rocks on a slight hilltop. They tried using explosives to burrow through the rocks. It wasn't until one person died did they decide to go around the lava rocks. The strange thing was this area of highway was a place where most car accidents happened. And then they brought in a specialist who communicates with fairies. She told the government to let the priests from each corner of the county, north, south, east, and west. They said prayers and placed a cross at the place. They told them that they would have to leave the cross there for 1 year, because they had built on a sacred holy place for fairies. And if they ever wanted to build somewhere like this again, they would have to ask for permission, which they hadn't done before. Sure enough, accidents stopped, and they had made her a minister of fairies. We're very superstitious in Iceland, and have huge respect for magical things in nature, and I think people forget how large the land is. If one would place England together with Ireland, that would be the size more or less. Oh, I didn't know that. But because there are only 350,000 people, yep, not even 500,000, the landscape is quite large, and Icelanders have huge respect for the magic of the land, people, and sea. Okay, so that kind of answers my question regarding the previous commenter's comment. Next comment's Jill Fisher 5 years ago. There's a surprising similarity between the British garden gnomes and the Norwegian Nissa. They both wear pointed red hats. Modern belief ascribes them both to extra-dimensional beings, which just means they exist mostly outside of the ranges of human senses, which are actually very limited. Okay, so the Nissa, the Norwegian Nissa, which is something I covered in a comparison of Canadian and Scandinavian folklore, is supposed to have a red hat, which doesn't surprise me. That's kind of like a common European thing. And Jill Fisher has another comment 5 years ago. It could well be that DMT makes them visible as some people do see them. They are not demons. They are quite benign and can be helpful, but don't annoy them. In Norway, in the countryside, they put out a bowl of rice pudding at Christmas. Rice pudding is their Christmas pudding. In the barn for the farm Nissa, and he helps look after the livestock for the coming year. Forget it at your peril. Reminds me a little bit of the Irish, sorry, not Irish, the Newfoundland tradition, which maybe comes from the Irish, of putting bread out. They say that if you leave bread out, I think it's like bread and milk, I think, or maybe just bread and water, the fairy will not bother you. He'll leave you alone. And the DMT, that's like a hallucinogenic drug. And a lot of people who take DMT say they see, the word that people use for them is the clockwork elves. I don't know what the clockwork means, but people who take DMT often will see kind of elves, which are almost described as like the biblical seraphim, which doesn't seem like an elf to me. But they'll see beings, I guess. And I think the descriptions of them are similar. I honestly shouldn't talk about this because I don't know enough about it. But suffice to say that people who take DMT are supposed to see little people. Next comment's Britt Marik 5850 5 years ago. I'm living in the mountains called Fjall in the north of Sweden, and I have seen one of these little people once. My husband's grandmother told us that she had seen some of them twice. It is some stories here about people seeing little people often a long time ago. They are said to be kind to people, if we are kind to them, leaving some food out and don't build and destroy their places. The one I saw was about 20 centimeters in height and was skiing over the hill of snow that had fallen from the roof earlier. I saw him from the kitchen window. So they can ski. Interesting, it's the first story I've heard of that. Next comment, Stephen Kant 4714 5 years ago. Yes, the Sami from Lapland are the inspiration for Santa's elves. Their clothes are just like elves' clothes. They have always been reindeer herders. Need I say more? Oh yes, they only grow 4 feet, elves. Interesting, I never heard that before. So the Sami are they're Caucasian people, but they have a very indigenous lifestyle, kind of herding reindeer in Finland, I think, northern Finland. So he's saying that the Sami are the Laplanders are the inspiration for Santa's elves. Interesting. Next comment, Steinar Bjerk, 7623, 3 years ago. My granddad and his wife from Austria. So my dad told me what his mom told him about St. Nicholas. He awarded nice kids, but took the bad away. Norway got a lots of folklore. Huldra, the small people, beings living inside rocks and mountains. The being called Nissa inhabits farms, living in the barns, stables, and such. Haven't encountered any of these energies, but I have started to offer givings of good faith on their part. Spices, coffee, tea, sugar, wool, silver, dried mushrooms, exotic things like hibiscus. Can't hurt. Next comment, Super Sleuth 3527, 5 years ago. The Vikings certainly got around, including landing in Scotland and Ireland, and sparking stories of the Tuatha De Danann. Danes, ? Mixed with the ancient stories are the many wars and legends of magical device, a sword of power much like Excalibur, the Stone of Destiny, which is now the Coronation Stone, a great spear, and a cauldron that would feed the world. When the Tuatha De Danann clan lost a war, they were allowed to stay but were forced underground through the mounds that were built. They became the legendary Fae or Fairy folk. But what if they were extraterrestrial visitors, or colonizers seeking a verdant planet to colonize? Interesting idea. I never heard of the Tuatha De Danann. Next comments, Fitta Below 4 years ago. In Norway, Santa is a Nissa, basically just a slightly larger elf. We don't really separate between the two. They're basically just a bunch of magic elves with different roles. None of them have dark hair. Santa came later. The humanoid he resembles Odin in more than one way, from his clothes to his beard and mannerisms, just a little nicer. Skrawling is, in the Norwegian vocabulary, it basically means frail, small, weak physique, or sickly looking, not a compliment. Okay, a couple different things there. He must have been responding to my video on elves from the North Pole more than a fairy tale. So he's saying that Santa is inspired by Odin. And then he's saying the Skrawling, which are the Native Americans that the Vikings encountered during their colonization of Greenland and North America. Skrawling means small, weak, physique, or sickly looking, not a compliment. Next comments, Per Carlson, 4915, 5 years ago. Vitra, Sweden, Huldra, Norway, Mahinen, Finland, same tradition. So I guess those are just names for different elves or fairies. Next comments, Slurpee, 3 years ago. There's a Nissa folklore in Scandinavian region that predates Christianity, and they're also associated with Christmas traditions. Okay, next one's Steinify, 4 years ago. As an Icelander, I appreciate that you made a video about this subject. No one in my country risks offending the little people or the hidden folks, even if they believe in their existence or not. The government even changes the layout of road building, if there is a risk of disturbing the settlements of those entities because of previous bad experiences. Right, and that kind of corroborates what we talked about before, what another commenter said. Next comments, Jaludalwarts, 3 years ago. We live in the Arctic in Norway, and during our house building process we had to blast some rocks. An hour or so later we were just standing and looking at a blast area, and my husband and I both saw a small naked man run from the blast area straight into the side of a mountain. Our dog saw it too, and ran after it to the mountain wall, where he had just smelled the dirt, trying to figure out where it went. Since the little man was naked, we feared we had destroyed his home with the blasting. We were told to put out offerings to apologize. Years later, I read folk tales from the area that are filled with little people who dance around a house or a barn or look after the animals, if treated properly. If not treated properly, they can do harm. Never saw anything like it before, and never seen anything like it since, but I know they are real now. So interesting, the idea that little people can go into rocks, like they live inside rocks. That's a universal belief. Like I know the Icelanders have that story that the Huldafolk, the elves, the hidden people, live inside rocks and like inside mountaintops and stuff like that. And it's also a Cree story. Cree and I think Ojibwe, for sure Cree. They say that they live inside the cliffs that kind of run along riverbanks. I'm sure it's Ojibwe and maybe even Algonquin too, where there's like native stories about maybe natives will start chasing these guys and the rock will open up and they will go inside and it'll close behind them. Reminds you a little bit of that old German story, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who, how does that story go? The city was overrun with rats, and so he came and he had a magic flute or something, and he would play the flute and the rats would all go drown themselves in the river, and he had agreed to do this on the condition that one of his demands be met. I can't remember what it was. When the condition wasn't met, he just started playing his flute, and all the children of the town went and walked into a mountain with him, and then the mountain closed behind them. I think that's the legend. So interesting that all over the world there are stories of mysterious, magical people that live inside rocks. Next comments, Coconut Fleet Sleeper 5717 1 year ago. Little people, Torntar, Vatar, and so on, is such an integral part of Swedish folklore. It's a reality if you get out there and meet people who still live among them. It's a big country with a majority of people living in or near cities. Get off the beaten path and you might find something you're not looking for. Next comments, Loading Mika 7451 1 year ago. In Scandinavian folklore we had the little people. They could be mischievous if not fed by the farmers, but if fed, they would bring luck to the farm and protect it. I've experienced 2 bearded humanoids while sleeping in some woods when I was a teen. I was going to sleep in my sleeping bag in the woods, as my mother's car had only enough space for her and my little brother. Before closing my eyes, I got this thought that I was going to say out loud. Tell the animals that I want to be left alone. I'm just sleeping here, and will be going when I wake up. Then 2 bearded humanoids stood maybe 2 meters away from me in wool clothing and red top hats appeared, smiled at me and said in thought, so telepathically I guess, "Hi hi, we will tell them hi hi." Or hee hee, maybe they're laughing. And they disappeared as fast as they appeared. I just thought, okay, thanks, and fell asleep. These woods and entities felt genuine, and it felt like a protected part of the woods. I showed it respect, and they showed me respect. So another mention of the red hats, red top hats. Interesting. Next comments, Wolf Ogre 1 year ago. I have a friend who claimed to have seen some sort of little men on Omberg, a small mountain and nature reserve in my part of Sweden. They were quite small, approximately 45 centimeters tall or so, and apparently wore stereotypical gnome-style clothes, but all in mossy green, with grayish-green skin, and bearded as well. Interestingly, my friends did not jump to the conclusion that they had seen something supernatural, or even real, but instead went to a doctor to check for potential medical issues causing a hallucination. It came up negative, and to this day he has no explanation, outside of actually seeing those little beings. Either that, or it was a ridiculously realistic and even almost pointless prank. I have no reason to distrust him, but can offer no explanation other than those he concluded. So the detail of it having mossy green clothes kind of reminds me of some of the Newfoundland stories. They say that the fairies have green clothes, and that you're not supposed to, if you're going to go to an area that is supposed to be haunted by fairies, you're not supposed to wear green, because it will attract them to you, and you don't want them to come to you, because they can take you away to their fairyland, from which you can't escape. Next comments, Miraka 888, 11 months ago. In Sweden, the lore is of a little person living in old farms taking care of the family, house, and animals. They look like garden gnomes. I once saw one while living in a 100-year-old house with old farms as neighbors. The little gnome looked at me and saw that I saw him. My dog saw him too. I have always believed in their existence since I was a small child, listening to my grandmother's stories. She saw them often. And that is the end of comments about little people in Europe. And I've got comments of little people in other parts of the world, like there's a big one from Oceania. I call it Oceania, I don't know what the right word is for it, but like kind of New Zealand, Australia, and the Polynesian Islands. I don't know if you can even group those all together. And I've got stories from South America, and there's also stories from Asia. So if this sort of thing interests you, I'll do videos on those as well. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.